This is all about dividing fractions, and it's important that you start this knowing about the reciprocal and knowing about how to multiply fractions, because we're going to use both ideas to move on and fully gain understanding of dividing fractions. So the link between multiplying and dividing, and this is something I talk about in a previous video, and it's about the video where I divide a fraction and a whole number. So if you haven't watched that, it might be worth watching it. So multiplying by 1/4 is the same as dividing by 4, because if you have a number and you multiply by it, it's the same as dividing by that number's reciprocal. So multiplying by 1/4 is the same as dividing by 4, because 1/4 and 4 are reciprocals. Dividing by 3 is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal of 3, and the reciprocal of 3 is 1/3. Dividing by 3/5, it's the same as multiplying by its reciprocal. What's the reciprocal of 3/5? That's right, 5/3. So you should have got that. Well done. Now multiplying by 6/7 is going to be the same as dividing by the reciprocal of 6/7. What's the reciprocal of 6/7? 7/6. So it is really important that you understand the link that multiplying by 1/4 is the same as dividing by 4. Dividing by 3 is the same as multiplying by 1/3. Dividing by 3/5 is the same as multiplying by 5/3. And multiplying by 6/7 is the same as dividing by 7/6. And we're going to use that knowledge as we move into fractions and dividing. So I'm now going to do 2/5 divided by 5, and I've shown you how to do this via a diagram before in the last video, which I mentioned earlier. So I know that I can write 2/3 divided by 5 as 2/3 multiplied by 1/5, because from what I just revised earlier, these are the same. Dividing by 5 is the same as multiplying by 1/5. So just going to draw a diagram out to remind us about how to multiply fractions. Here's my diagram. 2/3. I deal with the 2/3 first of all, and 2/3 is this. Okay, and each of these is 1/3. So you can see clearly I've shaded in 2/3. Now I'm multiplying by 1/5, and to do this I then go across and divide this into fifths. Bit wobbly that last one, but each of these is 1/5. And I'm doing 1/5 multiplied by 2/3. So the bit that I'm going to shade in for my 1/5 is the other way. If you remember us doing that, it's like that. So I can say that 2/3 multiplied by 1/5 is equal to, now what's my denominator? Well, my denominator is all of the squares. So there's 15 of those. Count them up if you're not too sure. How many are there in total? And remember, it's 3 multiplied by 5 gives you that 15. So can you see that 3 multiplied by that 5 gives me that 15? And Here, the double shaded part, which we've talked about previously when we were doing multiplying fractions, this is the bit we're interested in, the double shaded part. And this is 2 multiplied by 1, and it's 2. And the 2 multiplied by 1 comes from here, giving you the numerator. So you can draw the diagrams, and it really is important to understand the diagrams, because what the diagrams do is they explain the maths. It's very easy to learn the process of how to multiply and divide fractions, and then within weeks it's very easy to forget it. Whereas if you understand the diagram and you can draw the diagram, when you've forgotten it, you can go back and draw the diagram. But if you haven't practiced drawing those diagrams, you've got nothing to fall back on. And you're going to say, in a week's time, in a month's time, in 6 months' time, how do you multiply fractions? And that's what I don't want. I don't want you ever to ask that question. I want you to have understood it. I want you really to get this. So going through that diagram again, and I am going to go through it again, we divided into thirds. We had 2 of them, and we shaded 2/3. Multiplying by 1/5, we divided it into fifths, and we're multiplying by 1/5, and we shade then 1/5 in. This is our double shaded bit, and if you notice, the total is that multiplied by that, which is the 15. There's 15 squares. Now the double shaded bit is the 2. So if you've totally forgotten the method, you draw the diagram and there's your answer. But the reason it's 2 is because it's 2 along there multiplied by 1 down there, so 1 times 2. And that's where it comes from. So that's the why of multiplying fractions, which we've done before, but it's always good to review these things. And the other thing we need to remember is dividing by 5 is the same as multiplying by 1/5. And 5 and 1/5 are reciprocals. So let's have a go at another one. So this question here, 2/3 is the divided by 1/5 is the same as 2/3 multiplied by, what are you going to write? What's the reciprocal? 5. Now this can be a tricky one because people get this one wrong, if I'm honest. This is the one that can get you confused. And what we've got is 5 lots of 2/3 if you look at this. And 5 lots of 2/3 is the same as me drawing the following. So what I'm going to do is draw a bar and shade 2/3 in, draw another bar and shade 2/3 in. I've now got 2 lots of 2/3, and then I've got 3 lots of 2/3, then I've got 4 lots of 2/3, and then I've got 5 lots of 2/3. So this is 5 lots of 2/3 because this is 1 lot of 2/3, 2 lots of 2/3, 3 lots of 2/3, 4 lots of 2/3, 5 lots of 2/3. So how many thirds have I got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So my answer is 10/3. See how that diagram really helps me again? Now, to do this without the diagram, the way to actually visualise it is you need a denominator for that 5. What is the denominator for 5 wholes? Well, the answer is how many parts is my bar divided into if I have 5. So here I've divided into 3 and I've got 2 of them, but how many is 5 wholes? If I had a whole bar, how many bits is it divided into? Well, it's a whole. It's one piece. So there's my denominator. We don't write denominators for integer values or whole numbers because there's no need. But actually, if you need to write that denominator in, it's 1. And therefore, if you then do your multiplying, it's 2 multiplied by 5, which is 10, 3 multiplied by 1, which is 3. So that's why the short method, you need that numerator of 1, because you can make silly mistakes otherwise. 10 thirds. Well, 10 thirds, I've now got to think about writing that as a mixed number. Well, I'm now going to draw my bars out. Well, that's 3 thirds. Then I've got another, that's 6. I'm going to have to keep going. That's 9. Oh, and I have 1 left over. So that's the same as 3. And then 1/3. So draw those bars out. If you needed to draw the extra third in there to help you as well. There's 10 thirds. So you'll notice I've made 3 holes with my 10 thirds and 1 more, which is 1/3 left over. So just going through that again from the beginning. Dividing by 1/5 is the same as multiplying by 5. I can draw my bars, which is brilliant. If you do, you're just a star, you're just wonderful. The quick method that everyone forgets within about a week is that 5 has a numerator of 1 because it's 1 whole. Therefore, I can write that not a numerator of 1, a denominator of 1. So 5 has a denominator of 1 because it's 1 whole. So 5 out of 1, or 5 over 1. So 2 multiplied by 5 is 10, 3 multiplied by 1 is 3, is 10 thirds, which is 3 and 1/3 as a mixed number. So let's do some more. So with these next ones, first stage, I want you to rewrite them as a multiply. So what would 3/4 divided by 2/7 be? I want you to keep pressing pause in this. So you're going to press pause now. What is that going to be? That's great. It's 7 over 2. So dividing by 2/7 is the same as multiplying by 7 over 2. So now you can either draw a diagram or you can do the quick method. So what would my numerator and denominator be? Well, if you remember, quick method, we can multiply our numerators and our denominators because this works for multiplying fractions, which we've learned. And now what we're doing is we're taking our knowledge of dividing and multiplying being linked, and we're using our multiplying fraction skills. And that would be 21 out of 8. Okay, now that's an improper fraction. Can you write it as a mixed number? Press pause, draw those bars. And it would be, just going to make this a little bit smaller, 2 and 5/8. Did you get 2 and 5/8? If you did, well done. You drew those bars out correctly. Right, let's do the next one. So 2/9 is the same as multiplying by what? Make sure you're writing those questions out. 2/9 divided by 3/8. What's that equal to? Hopefully you've written 8/3. There we go. So what would I now write as my answer? Well, 2 times 8 is 16. And 3 times 9 is 27. So 16 over 27, because we remember how to work out multiplying fractions. So the last one, I want you to write all of this next stage. So press pause, copy out the question to start with. Can you now write what would go here? Okay, hopefully you've written 4/5 multiplied by 3 out of 2 or 3 over 2. So what would that be the same as? Press pause, write it down. So that would be 12 and 10. Can you simplify that? Draw those bars for me. And the answer is 1 and 1/5. Now, if you've got 1 and 2/10, that's because you didn't cancel down your 2/10. Your 2/10 can be cancelled down to 1/5 because 1/5 and 2/10 are equivalent fractions. So actually, dividing fractions, as long as you remember that dividing by 2/7 is the same as multiplying by 7 over 2, there's nothing new to learn. And we actually learnt that previously in one of my videos. So you may already know that. And actually you're looking at today and going, there's nothing new. And there is nothing new with dividing fractions. Once you understand the link between dividing and multiplying, you already know how to multiply fractions. You can divide fractions. Right, you now need to go off and do some practice.